There is a version of this story that sounds absurd until you look at the evidence. Ancient humans, people who had no doctors, no hospitals, no antibiotics, no painkillers, no surgical tools, no vaccines, and no understanding of germ theory, were, in several measurable and significant ways, healthier than you are. Not healthier than the average person in a developing country, healthier than the average person in one of the wealthiest, most medically advanced societies in human history. And the reason why tells you something deeply uncomfortable about the gap between how humans were built to live and how most of us are actually living right now. Let's start with the most concrete example, because it's the one that surprises people the most. Teeth. When physical anthropologists examine the skeletal remains of pre-agricultural humans, people who lived before farming, before processed food, before sugar became a daily staple, they find something unexpected. Good teeth. Straight teeth. Teeth with minimal decay, minimal crowding, minimal evidence of the kinds of chronic dental problems that now affect the majority of adults in the developed world. A 2015 study published in Nature Genetics analyzed the oral microbiome of ancient human remains and found that the diversity of bacteria in prehistoric mouths was significantly higher than in modern mouths, and that the shift toward a less diverse, more decay-promoting oral microbiome tracks almost perfectly with the introduction of agriculture and later processed foods. Ancient humans weren't brushing twice a day. They weren't flossing. They had no dentists. And their teeth were, by most measurable standards, better than yours. This same pattern appears in bone density. Studies of pre-agricultural human skeletons consistently show bone density significantly higher than modern humans of equivalent age. A 2015 Cambridge study comparing the limb bones of early farmers and hunter-gatherers found that modern humans have bones closer in density to other primates than to our immediate prehistoric ancestors. We are, structurally, physically weaker than the people who came before us. Not because our genetics changed, because we stopped doing what they did. Hunter-gatherers walked an average of 8 to 16 kilometers per day across varied terrain, not on flat pavement, not on a treadmill, but across ground that required constant micro-adjustments of balance, strength, and coordination that activated muscle groups modern exercise rarely touches. Their bones responded to that demand by becoming denser, stronger, more resilient. Bones are living tissue, and they grow in response to stress. Ancient humans gave them stress, constantly, unavoidably, just by living their daily lives. Now consider cardiovascular health. The conventional assumption is that heart disease is simply a consequence of aging, something humans have always faced, something modern medicine has gotten better at managing. The evidence suggests otherwise. CT scans of ancient Egyptian mummies, published in The Lancet in 2013, did find evidence of atherosclerosis in some remains, which was initially used to argue that heart disease is universal and ancient. But a follow-up study examining mummies from 4 different ancient populations, published in Global Heart in 2014, found something more nuanced. The individuals with arterial disease were almost exclusively from high-status groups, the ancient equivalent of the sedentary wealthy, while remains from populations with more physically active, less grain-heavy diets showed significantly less arterial damage. Heart disease wasn't absent in the ancient world, but it was far less prevalent, far less severe, and concentrated almost entirely in the populations whose lifestyles most closely resembled our own. Here's where the picture gets more complicated and more interesting. Ancient humans didn't live as long as we do. Average lifespan in prehistoric populations was dramatically lower than in the modern developed world, often cited as around 35 years. But this number is deeply misleading, and the way it gets used in popular discussions of ancient health is one of the most persistent distortions in how we talk about prehistory. That average lifespan was pulled down catastrophically by infant and child mortality. In a world without vaccines, without antibiotics, without clean water infrastructure, a significant percentage of children died before their 5th birthday. When you remove those early deaths from the calculation and look only at humans who survived childhood, the picture changes dramatically. A hunter-gatherer who made it to age 15 had a reasonable chance of living into their 60s or 70s. Not universally, not comfortably by modern standards, but the idea that ancient humans were uniformly short-lived, worn out, and physically broken by middle age is simply not supported by the skeletal evidence. What the skeletal evidence does show is a different kind of health profile. Ancient humans suffered from acute dangers: infection, injury, predation, starvation in lean seasons, at rates modern humans in wealthy countries almost never encounter. But they suffered from chronic diseases, the slow, degenerative conditions that now represent the leading causes of death and disability in the developed world, at dramatically lower rates. Type 2 diabetes was essentially non-existent in pre-agricultural populations. Obesity was rare. Chronic lower back pain, now one of the most common medical complaints in the world, appears rarely in pre-agricultural skeletal records. Autoimmune disorders, which have been rising sharply in the developed world for decades, were uncommon. The diseases killing most people in wealthy countries today are not the diseases that killed ancient humans. They are, almost entirely, diseases of mismatch, conditions produced by the gap between the environment our bodies were built for and the environment we're actually living in. The food question sits at the center of this. Pre-agricultural humans ate a diet of extraordinary variety. Depending on the season and the region, a hunter-gatherer might consume hundreds of different plant species over the course of a year: roots, leaves, fruits, seeds, bark, fungi, along with animal protein from dozens of different species. That dietary diversity fed a gut microbiome of corresponding complexity, and a growing body of research suggests that microbiome complexity is directly connected to immune function, mental health, inflammatory response, and metabolic regulation. The average person in a modern Western country consumes a diet built around a tiny handful of crops: wheat, corn, soy, rice, that provide calories, but not the diversity of fiber, phytonutrients, and microbial inputs that a human gut was built to process. We are eating more calories than almost any humans in history, and we are, simultaneously, more nutritionally narrow than almost any humans in history. That combination is producing health outcomes that would have been unrecognizable to our ancestors. And then there is the question of movement. Not exercise, but movement. There is a difference, and it matters. Exercise is a scheduled activity. Movement is a constant background condition of life. Ancient humans didn't exercise. They moved constantly, unavoidably, as a structural feature of daily existence. They carried things, walked everywhere, crouched, climbed, lifted, threw, and performed a continuous variety of physical tasks that engaged the full range of human biomechanical capacity. The modern equivalent, sitting for 8 hours, then going to the gym for an hour, is not equivalent. Research consistently shows that prolonged sitting produces metabolic effects that a subsequent workout does not fully reverse. You can be someone who exercises regularly and still suffer the health consequences of a fundamentally sedentary lifestyle, because the human body was not built to be still for the majority of its waking hours and then briefly active. It was built to move constantly, at low intensity, with occasional bursts of high intensity, which is almost exactly the opposite of how most modern humans actually spend their days. None of this is an argument for returning to a prehistoric lifestyle. Ancient humans faced dangers and hardships that no rational person would choose: infant mortality, famine, violence, infection from injuries that modern medicine resolves in days. The average prehistoric human's life contains genuine suffering that modern medicine has made genuinely rare, and that matters enormously. The point is not that the past was better. The point is that the gap between the environment humans were built for and the environment most of us now inhabit is wider than we tend to acknowledge. And that gap is producing a specific, measurable, and largely preventable set of health consequences that we keep treating as inevitable features of modern life, rather than what they actually are: mismatches. Your body was not built for your chair. It was not built for your diet. It was not built for the light schedule you keep, or the sleep pattern it produces, or the near total absence of physical variety in how you spend your hours. It was built for something older, more demanding, and in several specific ways more sustaining than the environment most of us live in. Understanding that doesn't require you to romanticize the past. It requires you to look clearly at the present, at what we traded and what the trade cost, and at the possibility that some of what we traded away wasn't inevitable, that some of it was a choice we made without fully understanding what we were choosing. Ancient humans didn't have medicine, but they had a life their bodies recognized. And right now, most of us have medicine, and a life our bodies are still trying to figure out.